there's been a lot of talk about the Dylan Mulvaney Bud Light fiasco, and they've lost, I want to say, 24 or 25% of their sales. And there's a lot of talk on the news about how other brands have been making up for it in terms of, the people are still drinking the same amount of beer. It's just that 24-25% is going to other brands. But like, what's interesting to me is that there's no talk about which other brands there are. Again, I'm sure you could research, but the issue with that becomes Budweiser or Anheuser-Busch or Anheuser InBev owns a majority of those other brands, to include Saab Miller. So the idea that, like, instead of buying a Bud Light, you're buying a Miller Lite or Coors Light really doesn't affect the bottom line too much. So I know a lot of people online who, really follow this are like, yeah, this is a time to support your local brewer. I'd actually be interested to know how much of that money has gone away from this huge conglomerate who owns just the majority of beer sales worldwide versus how much of that money has gone into like a local brewery.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, the number of beer drinkers didn't change.
Right.
And the number of people who actually look at the back of a package to see, like, oh, Procter & Gamble owns most of everything. Like, the amount of beer drinkers that are going to turn the label over and say, oh, InBev owns, 5 of the 10 brands or what have you that I'm worth drinking or willing to drink.
Right.
Yeah, so I doubt that their bottom line is being affected at all.
I think with this, because it's strange, like, you have Anheuser-Busch, who is a subsidiary of InBev, or Anheuser InBev, and then you have Saab Miller, but they, there's Miller, and then there's Coors, who are, the biggest parts of Saab Miller. Because they're not even on the package, I'm really curious, like, how much of that is known. And the weird part about Saab Miller is technically they're their own company, but like Anheuser InBev owns just a majority share. So like
Right.
they don't own the company outright, but at the same time, like, they still get a kickback for that Miller Lite or whatever, assuming that people are like, I'm not going to drink Bud Light, I'll drink Miller Lite, in terms of like big brands. But you're also talking Corona, you're also talking, I mean, this is just Anheuser-Busch. You have Corona, you have Stella Artois, you have, I want to say, Modelo is another big one. But there's just a bunch of brands, like International, National, Bush. And when I look at news stories when they're reporting this, it's specifically Bud Light sales are down. It's not Anheuser-Busch sales are down. So I actually wonder how much of this is hurting the bottom line of that conglomerate. Because here's the thing, if this is just talk to, let the people voice their frustration and feel like they're making a difference, and really, the only thing is we sell 2 products. You're not buying one at the rate you were, but you're buying the other one more. Oh no, don't throw me in the briar patch.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, this is a giant PR stunt.
Right.
Which it has been. It's a circus show.
Absolutely.
So from the beginning, it's a circus show because, let's be honest, while we've been attending the beer drinkers circus show.
Right.
There's a whole lot of political stuff that's been going on in the background with, let's say, the Ukraine and the Russian war. Also, Trump's not inaugural campaign, but his presidential campaign has been going on. But also, things have been going on about his court case. Nobody's paying attention to that. Everybody's paying attention to Dylan Mulvaney and specifically the, sale of one flavor of beer when InBev owns most of everything.
Right. I mean, that's really what it comes down to me. And, I see all of these, TikTokers and social media people, and they're making all sorts of skits and jokes about how, I saw one the other day where somebody, was thinking about buying a Bud Light and then didn't, and somebody else says, well, I still drink it, it hasn't affected me, and he bends over and he's wearing panties under his thing.
Oh, God.
And it's like, the joke is, if you buy Bud Light, you're gay.
Sure.
But the thing is like, what about Budweiser? What about Busch? What about,
Sure.
Corona? Like, does that have the same whatever? Because it's the same company. You're creating something that's so... I mean, to me, and this is just a general statement, and this is on taste, I think Bud Light is the worst tasting major beer, period. Like, if you're going to drink a light beer, I like Budweiser as a flavor profile, but, there's something about Bud Light that just doesn't taste like Budweiser, and it gives me straight headaches. So, I avoid Bud Light. It's the only... beer where, because, here's the thing, if you go to a bar, especially, small town bars, they typically don't have a huge selection.
Sure.
And draft is typically the cheapest, and they only have 3 beers on draft. It's the only one I absolutely won't drink is Bud Light, and that's been true for forever. So, to me, this doesn't do anything, but is there a moral shift to get away from it? Because I don't think that this campaign is actually hurting.
No, if anything, to be honest, I think it was a test, a market test of which one of our brands, flavors, could potentially withstand a PR stunt like this, where if we do this, we don't want to kill a flavor. Let's say we don't want to kill Corona, right? Because whatever reason. But Bud Light has enough of a following that even if it were to dip in sales, it won't kill it. Also, we think it'll bounce back. So let's do the social experiment on this flavor.
Sure. Well, I think there's a part of that. I also think that because so many people are making fun, there's so much energy being put towards Bud Light is gay, or whatever you want to, pejorative you want to throw there. We're not paying attention to other things, one, but two, I seriously wonder if people, because it's not directly tied to the marketing of that beer, do people know that buying a Miller Lite or a Coors Light or a Busch or a Busch Light
is the same thing,
or a Michelob, and I feel like it's funny because I think the thing that I keep hearing from people, which is dumb to me, is Bud Light used to be America First type of rhetoric.
Right.
And now we've gone from America First, support our troops, to, guys in dresses, it's kind of the mentality. But the reality is this is always a corporation. They were always just telling you what they thought that we wanted to hear. And this is, it's always a corporate entity. They were never America First. They've been not America-owned for a long fucking time. So I seriously doubt that the overlords, which I believe are central to Belgium, give a shit about America First. This is not a thing that has existed for a meaningful period of time. So, I also, this is just a random one. Did you know that there is a Budweiser Germany, an actual town? And
oh, no. So it's like cheddar, where the cheddar is made in the city?
I don't know about a cheddar, but regardless, a lot of German, the way that they do beer there is you have local, they don't have national brands to the same extent they do here.
Sure.
They have a couple, but most of it is, if you want a beer, you go to the brewery and you get it there, and they don't really ship it outside of that thing. So you actually, beer tours are a big thing in Germany, because if you want to go and get, the best beer, you have to go to where it's made to get it, and get it at that pub. So Budweiser Germany makes Budweiser beer, and they've been making it for, hundreds and hundreds of years. It's the same recipe. So Budweiser, stupid enough, sued the copyright of Budweiser beer in Germany, which has been operating under the Budweiser name for hundreds of years before Budweiser as an Anheuser-Busch ever existed. So here's the problem. They lost. Budweiser Corporation lost.
Really?
Because, of course, Budweiser Germany, this small little, they make beer at a local tavern. One, because they've been making beer at that local tavern for 600-700 years.
Sure.
500 of which were before, Budweiser Corp ever existed. So, by losing, Budweiser, the tavern, is fuck you, you had made us pay all these legal expenses. We want the copyright.
Huh.
So they're going through the process of trying to win the Budweiser copyright to where Budweiser Corp can no longer say the word Budweiser.
Huh. And when did this happen?
A few years ago. Like this is, I mean, I imagine that like in the legal process it's very slow, and I don't even know if that's been thrown out. Like I know when they initially won it made news.
Sure.
But like I'm sure that the Budweiser PR people kind of kept that hush hush.
Oh, absolutely.
And maybe they paid them off and it's gone away since then. But I actually wonder if the killing off the Budweiser flavor had anything to do with they can't keep the Budweiser name, and this is just a
way to do it.
Right. To make people feel like they matter. It's like the whole idea of the illusion of choice. Like,
yeah.
That if you can be mad and feel like that you can put a huge corporation under, when really what you don't realize is...
It was all manufactured from the beginning.
It was all manufactured from the beginning, and these corporations are so large that they don't care about one little brand. Like, they're so much bigger than that, and the losses that they can sustain are so huge that we're like, well, they lost... $200 million, and it's like these companies are $1 trillion companies. Yeah. Like $20 million is not something that they care about. Also, when you figure that it was made up elsewhere, I really do wonder of that 25%. I would be willing to bet that 20% of it went to brands that they had stakes in.
Sure.
Like there might be a 3 or 4% attrition rate to go to your local. Brewery or whatever, microbrewery. But even then, most people don't realize that a lot of the microbreweries are owned.
Right.
Or being bought out by.
Again, illusion of choice.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. And actually, I wonder how much overall beer sales increased because, again, to your point, somebody wanted to be heard. So they're like, I don't generally or normally drink beer, but because I want my choice or voice to matter, I'm going to buy beer now to support the other guy.
And the other guy is the same guy.
And the other guy is the same guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the other part of this that we've talked about is Dylan Mulvaney as a sponsor, if you want to be anti-trans for whatever movement, is also a spokesperson for Oil of Olay, which is a Procter & Gamble owned company.
Right.
So... my thought process there is Oil of Olay is kind of more of a women's company, and I tend to find that women, generally speaking, care less and less about the trans issue than men do. I've found that to be just an overall statement. I'm not saying no women do. I'm not trying to make general statements, but I find that it's a little bit more like I don't want to touch with this. We're going.
Well, I think it's more that the transition movement in makeup has been a thing for a little while now.
Right.
Like, maybe not so much in your face as it is now, but, I mean, the drag thing was... I mean, makeup was never exclusionary.
Right.
So, it's been just going on for longer. We've had a longer time to normalize it.
Sure.
But nobody's canceling Oil of Olay, which they're campaigning in tandem with Budweiser. Like, these campaigns are running at the same time.
And it makes me wonder, had Dylan Mulvaney, instead of it being Bud Light, been Michelob, which is kind of more of a... They try and be more of a trendy beer, and they have the Michelob Ultra, which is, the hipster kind of whatever. So I kind of wonder if they had got, if it's actually the issue of, we're anti-trans as a movement, or if it's, you have tainted something that used to be very masculine. Because, Oil of Olay is owned by Procter & Gamble, and so is Old Spice. Mm-hmm. So, Oil of Olay isn't considered to be masculine, whereas, if you put Old Spice and, you were the object of masculinity in your dress or whatever, then that might have triggered people. But, it's not actually the trans aspect to it that's whatever, because you don't hear anything negative to Procter & Gamble, and Procter & Gamble makes pretty much everything.
Turn a label over in any grocery mart or, general store, and it's usually bottom left or bottom right-hand corner, and you see the Procter & Gamble. Right. Where they own just about everything.
Yeah, just about everything. So, I find that to be interesting, but speaking of companies owning everything.
Right.
I want to get into real estate. and specifically about interest, because we've had so many things in dealing with just the economy going to shit lately. Like, I mean, so first you have COVID. So everybody who has a mom and pop shop or independent business, they all closed.
Oh, yeah.
And here's the thing, is like, even if you're like an online business where you don't really care so much about like
the brick and mortar
aspect to it, the issue is a lot of the companies that like you got your inventory from elsewhere.
Right.
Your inventory dried up because they were brick and mortar and they couldn't be in the factory. Right. So like, as someone who worked in marketing at the time, every company that had hired me that I was working for went out of business within a month. And
it was weird.
Yeah, and a lot of them emailed me and were like, well, when this picks back up, we're good to go, whatever. But none of them did. Just none of them. I mean, they laid people off, they were getting their check, and it was almost more profitable for them to close and get some sort of check from the government for having a business closed than it was for them to pick it back up and take risks again, because small business is risks.
Well, those loans were forgiven anyway,
right?
So like, absolutely, it was in their best interest to, one, apply and take the money and not work, because those loans were forgiven anyway,
right?
Than to try. Absolutely.
But what you end up with is lack of stability. Because Walmart, Target, the big box stores, Amazon specifically, Amazon made a killing. They made all the money. And then you had this huge debt where you're just taking money from the government and reapplying it. But then you had kind of this fluctuation of prices in the market go up. And you didn't know this, but the reason why all the housing prices were going up right after COVID is because they were being bought up by megacorps.
Right, and that's what we were so like on the news it was saying that, or not on the news, on TikTok, I was seeing a lot of this kind of, how do I get into the real estate or landlord business? And really the catalyst is the interest rates are just too high. People want to sell their home, they want to move, they want to do what people do, and they can't because they're locked into this low interest rate that they got pre-COVID, 2%. And now you can't get an interest rate for less than 5%.
Right. And what I mean, when we started talking about this in terms of us buying rental properties, the issue is we would have to pay cash because, like, the interest rates are, they're credit card level high.
Yeah.
And to do that on $200,000 loan is just ridiculous.
Stupid.
And I don't think anybody can afford it right now, and while it might become the new normal and prices might start reflecting that, they haven't yet because people are waiting for a bubble or for a resolution. So like, you just have a stagnation in the market. However, you have these megacorps that are still continuing to buy houses. So there was a lot of conspiracy theory type of things going on during COVID where, they were looking at these corporations, the Vanguards, the BlackRocks, and they were buying, I want to say 30 or 40% of the entire amount of real estate in the United States during COVID. Like, they were just spending huge chunks of money, and the conspiracy was that they don't want people to own their home anymore. That what they want is to get into a rental state, which gets into the idea of a universal basic income, since what we were just talking about with people being unable to work, that you get a rental property, or you get like a house that is not yours, that's rented, that the government gives you, like, let's say that the rent for your house is $1,000, round number.
Sure.
And the government gives you $3,000, so you get $1,000 for whatever, you get $1,000 for food, and you don't have to do anything because we don't really need people to do services anymore. Like, we really don't at this portion of history. Like, there's really not too many jobs out there that can't be replaced by machines. So you get your 36, your the middle income, to survive on, but then you get deductions for speaking out or for, not having the right opinion, or like, you were being anti-trans, let's dock you $500, or you can't live in this building.
Sure. Well, I think, like, you jumped so far ahead, like, not that you jumped so far ahead, but you didn't explain that this ties back to that bill that in Congress or what have you about the cryptocurrency, where the government now can sanction your purchases.
Well, they will be next year. So what they're wanting to do is create a online digital currency to get rid of the dollar. And once that happens, you can start, like you don't have local banks anymore. What you have is a federal bank, kind of like what the Chinese communists have.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you do things that are not decreed by the government, you don't get access to your money anymore. And that's even more true if, you know, your source of income is no longer a job or a business or whatever, because again, everyone kind of gave up their business. The small businesses did during COVID. Now people are giving up their land. And here's the other one. I remember in 2020, I was looking to buy houses.
Right.
So the interests were still low, but the prices had like doubled during that time. So the issue is that like you were tricking older people.
Right.
Or, you know, people in the middle of their life, like they own their home outright and they're looking at what they paid. So let's say that you paid $50,000 for your home and now it's worth $250,000. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to profit $200,000. I'll just buy a new home. Well, the problem is you get that $250,000 and then you pay out, you know, your interest, your taxes, all the stuff. And you know, let's say you get that, of that $250,000, you make, you know, $180,000 in profit.
Right.
Well, now $250,000 is actually like the lowest you're going to get on
right.
a home. So you didn't even make the full $250,000. You made $180,000. So like you're now trying to buy another home where you still have to pay fees and whatever. So instead of, you know, let's say they cost $250,000, what you're really paying is like $270,000 out of your $180,000. So now you're in debt again.
At a 5% interest rate.
At a 5% interest rate, and you. Whatever. So a lot of those people would just take their money, put it in the bank, and then get an apartment.
I was going to say, rent. Where we have now come full circle.
Right. Yeah. And the other issue is of that, let's say they profited that $180,000, that has dramatically decreased in value because of inflation.
Sure.
The buying power isn't there, and we're about to throw that into a digital currency where...
You can't access it if you say the wrong thing.
Right. Because you don't have any stability, you don't own anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like the, a piece of candy, like, path, where it's like, a piece of candy, a piece of candy, and you just keep following this path, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, shit.
You're in a rape van. That's where you're at.
And, you know, and we live here now, literally. Like, I live in this apartment that I rent, trying to spend money that I have to beg for permission for, because if I don't keep my social justice score up, you know, I can't eat.
Right. That's where we're going. And I feel like with the purchases they're making now, with the interest rate being what they are, the only people who can afford these rates are companies who have trillions of dollars. If you look at BlackRock, like, they own every, like you know, you hear about, like, the biggest companies in the world are, like, Apple and Google and all these things.
The tech companies.
Right. They own, well, here's the thing. There's Vanguard, there's BlackRock, there's one more whose name escapes me, but they each own 30% of Apple and 30% of Google. So it's like, and then they own 30% of each other.
Right.
So it's like, these are trillion, like the $1 billion Googles. Yeah. Like, these are $1 trillion companies.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, even if they make, you know, like, they're trying to buy 100% of real estate, like, they'll never do that.
They don't have to. Like, they don't have to buy 100% of the real estate. They just have to buy enough.
Right.
And like 60-70% will get you there.
And I think they're above 50 right now in the U.S. and it's like scary.
Yeah.
And the thing is if this ever falters on them, the government will bail them out, guaranteed, because they're too big to fail. Because again, they're the biggest companies on earth. I mean, they're so big the banks would dry up if they failed. So I mean, you know, you hear about people talking about like we're showing it to them because we're not buying Bud Light, and it's like, really, like fuck the fuck off, like own your home, pay it off best you can, you know, beg, borrow, and steal if you have to, but like own your shit, own a business that's needed.
And don't give it up.
And don't give it up no matter what, even if you're working and struggling, because they don't need you, they don't want you, and they don't care about you. That's pretty much where this is going. So, yeah, like, I don't know what else to say about, like, the housing bullshit, because it's so scary and it's so big.
Yeah, I mean, well, even here in this tiny town,
Mm-hmm.
like, so we live in a tiny town, and
Right.
the prices fluctuate greatly.
Mm-hmm.
I think mainly because of the condition of the homes,
Sure.
which is basically like these big corporations don't want to buy a house they need to renovate.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to buy a mostly, move-in ready home,
Right.
which really means that if you and I are going to buy a house, or especially if we're going to buy it with cash, they're leaving the scraps for us, which makes
Right.
sense because if I were a big corporation,
Mm-hmm.
that would be my tactic too, is leave the scraps for the people because the people will take the scraps because that's all that they can take, but also they're going to sink so much capital
Into
into
renovation.
renovating it that they won't have they won't have money.
Security.
Yeah, they won't have security. They won't have money to keep on buying properties.
Right.
So sink them how we can.
Right.
Sure.
No, and it's so funny because I had a friend who was into real estate, like a real estate agent, and they were telling me like during COVID, they would get companies or calls from investors, these company people, and they'd just be like, "How many houses do you have for sale?" And they'd be like 6, and they'd be like, "We'll take them." And like
Yeah.
sight unseen, like this isn't like a whatever, this isn't like negotiating price.
Yeah,
like
we'll
whatever
take
6
it.
you got, we'll take it.
Yeah, so I knew several people who sold houses during the whole like COVID, post-COVID, like right at the end of like
Right.
21, who sold houses, and out of the maybe half dozen people that I knew who sold houses, about half of them sold their house prior to it hitting the market. So the realtor on MLS, whatever the acronym is, they put a like coming up posting, and the coming up posting basically just has like the Google view of the house, and they would get a bid in on that because people were so desperate to buy houses or corporations,
Sure.
they were selling before they even hit the proper market.
And like another thing that I've noticed that's kind of tying in with all of this is, during COVID, the big cities, like the mega cities, were the ones that were the hardest hit with crime and all of the riots and things. So like your New Yorks, your LAs, your Chicago's,
Right.
your San Francisco's. So like people like there was a whole list of moderate to smaller towns and cities that people were fleeing to get away from a lot of the mob violence and
Right.
a lot of the whatevers. So like I remember Phoenix being a really big one, and like Dallas, and I don't remember all of them, but whatever. But the issue is now that COVID ended, people were buying houses in Phoenix, and then like they're like, oh well, you have to come back to work, and like this has
Right.
become like such a big issue, and it's kind of lost favor in the public eye because I don't think people are looking at the big picture, because everyone's like, you lazy smuck, like go to work and do your job, like they're paying you, like why are you complaining about
Why are you
having to
complaining?
work?
Yeah.
But the issue is they're now having to put their house back on the market, and chances are they've lost enough money in all of this that they're not going to be able to buy when they get back to their job.
Right.
So you basically just created a lot of houses on the market for these companies to gobble up. And we don't look at it that way because, again, we like to have the illusion of choice. We like to have the notion that what we're doing is, not a big deal. And I don't know, like that kind of stuff scares the crap out of me because nobody looks at it from a large picture of who owns all the properties right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, realistically, I don't think anybody actually thinks to themselves, who is the real estate agent that's running the, home that I'm renting from. Like, that's just it's not a company that's public. I mean, you don't see BlackRock commercials.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's just not something that people think about.
Right.
They just think, oh, it's, Remax, or, oh, it's whatever, real estate company here. And they just think that it's a, mostly mom and pop company, Airbnb. And even the Airbnbs have been going more and more corporate. Where the reason why people were renting from Airbnb is because they were trying to support the little guy. They were trying to, I have this one rental property. I only need to rent it out, a couple weekends a month.
To make ends meet.
To make ends meet. And now corporations are more and more saturating that market where it's not.
And like what they'll do is they'll buy up that individual's property and then keep them on to clean the sheets, to whatever. And the guy who's selling it's like, you're going to pay me what the house is worth plus pay me a salary. But again, it gets onto the lack of stability, because eventually what ends up happening is they look at that whatever town that guy's in and be like, we have 10 of you and we only need 3 to do all of the properties that we have, so we're just going to get rid of the 7. So that guy who thought he had a steady job, that was temporary while the corporate restructured, and they don't need you, and that's the whole point. And then it becomes a question of, okay, well, we have 10 of you and we need 3. Which 3 of you are willing to work for the least amount of money?
Sure. I mean, because really what it is you had an asset before, and then they trick you into thinking, well, you have an asset without any of the liability.
Right.
And then it's, oh, well, now
nothing.
You are the liability.
Right.
And now you have nothing.
Right.
Right. So again, it's the, a piece of candy. Come here, little fly. Just fly right into my little web.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's astounding how many little steps it takes to make a big difference. But once you get to the big difference, I mean, you're fucked.
And that's where we are right now. I mean, I see this as endgame right now. And, because I feel like if you have an uprising at this point, legally speaking, they're going to be like, well, all these corporations did it legally. And they have all the assets. So it's like, the money going to the police forces, they're going to side with them. You look at the military, which, a lot of people say we have the most trust in, but I feel like the military is not here's the thing. The average person who joins the military, I would say 80% of them are conservative people.
Sure.
But the officers all go to liberal-ass colleges.
Well, I was going to say this when you mentioned something about a dress when we were talking about beer. Have you seen the most recent military campaign? I saw it on Reddit. And so on Reddit, it's kind of hard to judge whether or not it's satire, but it was on a military subreddit. So.
Sure.
But it's a trans commercial. So they do the split screen just like they always do, where on one side they're wearing the uniform, but then on the other side it's a guy in drag. So
I mean, I feel like here's the thing, when I was in before and after the you can be openly gay thing that Obama did, so I was doing before that. But there were a couple of gay dudes that were just like, hey, I like men, but keep this on the DL. And there really wasn't that big of a difference between them before and after.
Sure.
That was allowed. But the biggest one is I would say half or more of the women in the military are lesbians.
Okay.
They're,
I mean, I'll buy that for $1.
Yeah, I would say, having known them, I would say around half. Maybe slightly less, 30-40%. But, there is a lot of lesbians in the military. But, they never really, published their business. They just did their thing. And it was, we kind of kept their secret in the ranks because, there was no reason to, be down people for this bullshit.
Sure.
But at the same time, I don't know, I've known people who were kicked out because it became apparent.
Sure.
And I think that's stupid. And I think you had people in office where it's you had this weird thing where it's as long as you don't say anything. But then you had the gay marriage legalization. So people were getting married, but then they're putting in their dependent as whatever, which is dumb. And then you have officers who are we have regulations that we're sworn to enforce, and the letter of the law says this, but that means getting rid of people. And I think some people were done dirty. I think you had people who were intolerant who, took advantage.
Sure.
Absolutely. But where you have it now, where it's the pride appreciation bullshit and people just doing whatever the fuck they want, what you've done is you've pushed out all of the very conservative country folk that made our military so great beforehand. All of the hyper-masculine warriors are done.
Well, I think that the military is a unique environment in that it's not just a job, right? It really, you are government property. The government is hiring you for a very specific purpose. And so I think it's unique in that it's not just a job. And where you can show your personality and you can show your whatever when you go and work for a company.
You can't in the military.
That's not the purpose.
Right.
It's not that you can't because, like, I am saying that you're not allowed because we don't want your freedoms, whatever. No, it's because it's a unique environment. You're there for a singular purpose, and that is to shoot or be shot.
Right.
Like, I'm not trying to be one way or the other or some kind of way about it, but, like, bottom line is you have one job, shoot or be shot.
Right.
And so, like, I'm sorry, but your personality doesn't matter when we're talking about firearm proficiency. Right. It doesn't matter when we're talking about, you know, can you follow an order? It just doesn't. And so trying to tell me that the military is going to be better because we're allowing people to feel their feelings doesn't make sense to me.
Right. I mean, what you want is the hypermasculine warrior stereotype. And I'm not saying that there's not other positions because, like, you know, like, the military is very large, and you get into GOB, which is the ground order of battle.
Right.
So, like, realistically, for every infantry unit, you have, you know, 9 other units there for support.
Right.
So, like, you know, if you work in, like, paperwork, it doesn't really matter. Like, I mean, yeah, it would be good if, you know, the base gets invaded that you could pick up a rifle and shoot.
Sure.
But, like, at that point, it really doesn't matter that you have a female or somebody who's not the hypermasculine warrior because, you know, God bless the people who do that. Like, a lot of people make fun of those people, but it's like...
They're necessary.
They're very necessary.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, they just are. And, like, I worked mostly doing, like, intel and doing undercover stuff. And it's like, you need women for that. Like, because you do. Like, whatever. Like, you know, interrogations, you need women because... Some guys will only open up to women. Like, there's, you know, gender dynamics at work there. So, like, you know, I worked with plenty of women. Some of them were great. Some of them were garbage. Same with the men. Like, you know, whatever. But when you get attached to special forces or, you know, infantry units, nobody's got time for that shit. Nobody does. And you also have, like, the fact, like, here's the thing. A lot of people, like, women-wise who are sexually assaulted, and I know this is going to be a very unpopular opinion, but it's like, the joke is infantry are a bunch of pigs, and it's like, no, they're hypermasculine. Like you want to talk that like it's like the toxic masculinity and the warrior masculinity is the same fucking thing. So it's like I remember we were at a fob in the middle of nowhere, and we had 2 females. We had 1 female on our team, which we like basically kept her in a broom closet. Like, no offense, but like you just really can't be out amongst the people. And then we had 1 girl who would restock the AFES once a month. And, like, the AFES is central, so everybody can get to it, and, like, you know, whatever. And she was not in uniform. I think she was a civilian. But, like, you know, she was wearing things that were probably tighter than they should have been. And, like, she would just get harassed to no end. Like, you know, to no end. And it's like, okay, I get that that's wrong. But,
sure.
But I also understand that that's the only woman these people have seen in a month.
Sure.
And...
This is what happens when you live in an apartment. I love how we were talking about renting and how it's like, own your home. And then it's like, oh, by the way, guys, you know, inconveniences of living where you rent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think with us is like we had some personal issues where we had to move across the country and... Yeah. We didn't want... Here's the problem. We almost bought a home that ended up being a total piece of crap.
Oh, my. Yeah, lying out the wazoo.
Yeah, we found them in so many lies that we were like, we can't trust them. So what we decided is rather than staying in our previously owned home and trying to buy something on the other side of the country, sight unseen, that it was better to come here, rent, and be able to see properties to pick from, and we just sold the other home. But, yeah, like I feel like this is something that we definitely feel on a personal level, where it's like a lot of these realities, I mean, we're lucky enough that we have the money to pay cash and that we're not trying to go through, you know, a loan or a conventional loan. But, like, I even remember, like, you telling me before, like, oh, why are you so hard against a conventional loan? Like, if it's only the last 20 or 30,000, and it's like, here's the thing.
Any percent is not your percent.
Any percent is not your percent. That is correct. But the other part of that is I think we're going to get to a place where you don't have fixed mortgage rates anymore.
Right.
So, like, you know, you started out at like 4 or 5%, and you're like, okay, but we're only, you know, borrowing $20,000, so it's only $500 a month. But then, as the percentage would increase, you're going to lose your home, and then again, like, that's one more property that is not on the market,
yeah.
not yours. So yeah,
Well, the other thing we did, which I kind of surprised you with, because it's a thing that I had done before, but I called the guy, you know, the property manager, and basically said, can we pay for the whole 6 months in cash? And that floored him. Because he was like, what in the world do you mean pay for the whole 6 months in cash?
And he gave us like a 20% off.
Yeah, so not only did we get 20% off, so we saved a ton, but then it's quite literally like, well, we live here now, you can't kick us out. Like,
right.
For all intents, we own it. Like, it's ours for 6 months, we paid in advance.
Sure.
And in cash. So,
sure.
Yeah, like I think that is something that just, people don't have cash like that on hand.
Right.
But if you do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you pay for anything in cash, it's generally a good idea. But, so getting into all of this, I think talking about stability, we have to go back to gender politics and...
our favorite subject.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have so many thoughts on this because, like, you know, we were just talking about the military and, like, you know, how they're trying to push women into the, you know, the military as well as, like, a lot of these frontline units.
Right.
Which is a horrible idea. So, like, these women are going to be sexually whatever, and and here's the thing, you're going to end up ruining those guys' careers, and you, like, that sounds like I'm taking the guys, you know, side, and I'm not. What it is that, like, you get into areas where this dude's not getting laid for a year.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, he needs to be fighting, but then you're making him smell a woman.
Sure.
And, like I can tell you, like, just as a personal story, when I was in boot, like, we weren't around women. I could, like, one walked by, like
and she smelled pretty.
She smelled something, you know, and it was funny because, like, I didn't see her.
Sure.
But I knew she was there, and talking later, everyone else also knew she was there.
And I'm sure, like, from smell alone, she was the most gorgeous person you've ever... Yeah, that's why I said she smelled pretty. It's not that she looked pretty. Like, just the smell alone, you're like, she's gorgeous.
Yeah, but, like, for weeks, that was the talk. Is, like, that you could smell her, So, but no, like, that's just, like, you know, you get into a hypermasculine thing, and you introduce women, and it throws off that balance. And the argument that, like, well, they just need to be better... You know, if you do end up having somebody does something in that situation, you now lose a hypermasculine person in a fight because of her. You also have the issue of if she gets injured.
Everybody protects her.
Everybody protects her, everybody stops, everybody does things that are not in the unit's best interest or in the mission's best interest to protect said person. Like, there's so many different diagnostics that they've done, and they're trying to make this about equality, not to mention that even right now, the qualifications to get into these units are lesser for women, so they're not as much of an attribute as another man would be, in most cases, because, again, the standards are lowered to allow them to be in, and they're like upper body strength, and it's like they were trying to do this with the SEALs, like the Navy SEALs, and it's like, you know, the Navy SEALs, from my understanding, like, when they're in the boats, they have to pull themselves up onto a speeding fucking boat, you know, which is hard as shit. And then you have, like, a woman who doesn't have to do the upper body, you know, strength tests, but, like, you're basically sending them out there to die.
Yeah, cannon fodder.
Or to get somebody else killed.
Sure. I mean, here's the thing about, like, gender dynamics, which right now is totally taboo to talk about. Right. But even kids will do that, where if there's a little girl who's hurt, not just other little girls, but, like, other little girls and most of the little boys will go and check on her. Like, it just is. Like, that, we're just wired that way. And the idea that you can fundamentally change humanity on a base level, is arrogant.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just flat arrogant. Like,
this top-down idea of like we're going to create a better society, it's the same thing that has killed every socialist movement ever, because like the reason why when you talk about like the funny enough we're talking about Ukraine, but like when the breadbasket of the Ukraine, what happened when socialism and communism got there is they said, well, the Ukraine is where all of the food comes from in the Soviet Union. And because of that, the farmers who've been farming it became rich because they're selling all the food to everybody. So they became rich. So they said, that's wrong. They should not have all that power. So they sent all of the people who owned it to the gulags, and they sent all of the people who were, what's the right word? They were jealous.
Sure.
And they said, this is yours now, you work it. But here's the thing, they didn't know how to, so everyone starved to death. Like, they didn't make any food because they didn't know how to, because they never learned the skills, so everybody starved.
Right, which goes back to schooling. Mm-hmm. So, like, now in school, you have no skills classes. Mm-hmm. So, like, shop class, home ec, farming, shooting. I mean, you used to be able to actually take a rifle to class.
Right.
Because there was actual rifle class.
Yeah. I mean, there was in my school.
Exactly. Well, I mean, you went to like military school, whatever. Yeah. But like this used to be, a regular normal thing where you would have kids, lay down on the gym floor with their rifles, and that was a thing. But like you have no skills class.
No school shootings in those schools.
Yeah. Well, what boggles my mind is like I did substitute teaching for a while, right? And what boggles my mind is like the skills class that they have now is fashion. And so they're like, we're going to do
the one
fashion.
Industry that you're never going to actually get into because all that shit's made in fucking Taiwan anyway.
Right. The other like skills-based classes they have are like engineering and design. And don't get me wrong, because like I'm a product of a STEM environment. I love STEM. I'm never going to say like, STEM is bad. But 9 out of 10 people, just baseline, if we were to take all the people in all of the buildings around us, how many people actually use engineering design methodology on their day-to-day life? That is the most not skillful skill. Like if you're going to take wood shop, if you're going to take like a rifle class, if you're going to take home ec, and now we're teaching CAD design, like computer assisted design on a computer. How many people are getting on Google 3D Sketch?
Well,
and
I think it's the idea that you have of like choice. That like, oh, well, we're doing our best to prepare your children and they're still living at home till they're 30.
Yeah.
Because, if you just look at what we were talking about, like rifle class. 1, learn how to hunt, learn how to feed yourself. Hunting has gone, down in terms of popularity. People don't know how to do it. You have being able to defend your home and family from the government, no less. I mean, the whole reason why Japan never tried to invade is because they said that, there'd be a rifle behind every blade of grass is, I think, the direct quote.
They said, that's exactly right. They basically thought if we ever invade actual homeland territory in the U.S., every household has a gun, we will never win. So that's exactly why they did Pearl Harbor and then stopped.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of technical detail into the Japanese plans for World War II, which I feel like is a whole separate thing.
Sure, but by and large, the reason why they never sent troops home ground was
right. I mean, well, actually, that's not entirely true because they actually did one time. There was a Japanese invasion in Alaska of one small town.
We would have to talk about that. I didn't know about that one.
Yeah, this is true. They invaded like one town of like 30 people in Alaska, but there was actually.
I wonder what the results were and if that actually was a deciding factor on them going into the whole.
I don't know. I mean, I remember reading about it or watching a video on it, but I don't remember the details.
So what I'm hearing is History Channel documentary time.
God, fuck me. Anywho. But no, like they never were going. I mean, I don't think they had the numbers. I mean, though, what's also funny to me talking about Japanese World War II history is no one talks about the atrocities the Japanese did. And it's so funny because like I'm Jewish to a degree, to the point where like everyone talks about the Holocaust and like I appreciate that. But when you look at the numbers killed by the Soviets, when you look at the numbers killed by Mao, when you look at what the Japanese did, I mean, it's just atrocious to like
Sure.
the nth degree, and it's like, you talk about racism, and it's because we don't care about, like Jews are at least kind of white, but like I don't think we cared about what they did to the Chinese at all.
Sure, but there's also Japan specifically had a brilliant like campaign, like what is it called, a PR campaign, where they basically just turned themselves into the cutest little
Right.
cultural society, like, oh, look at us, we're so
Anime
cute,
and,
we're kawaii and cute and harmless, and oh,
Right.
look at us. And then so they went from being
Right.
the aggressor to, oh no, don't hurt the cute little country that supplies you with the cute little dolls. And
Right. I also think a part of that is just that they've, since the atrocities occurred, they've denied. They've never taken responsibility. Oh, we didn't do that. You murdered. What was the name of the big city in China that they, Nanking. They killed, I want to say, 5 or 6 million people in Nanking, which is just one city. They did a really good documentary where they had modern actors read the testimonies of the victims there.
Sure.
And Woody Harrelson was one. It's one of the hardest things I've ever had to sit through. It's because it's firsthand written accounts of people who were there, written by Hollywood actors, read by Hollywood actors.
That's crazy.
And it's just, it makes Schindler's List look tame. I'm just going to tell you right now. Because what they would do is take a family of 10 children and tell them you have to kill each other and only one of you will survive.
Yeah, no.
And you literally, because here's the thing, not only did they get rid of 9, but the one who survived was
just broken.
Yeah. Absolutely broken.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the Japanese just did some of the most horrible things, and they would test, the officers had the swords, so that when they sharpened them, they would always test them on the locals to see if they were actually sharp enough to kill. So they would, just the atrocities and how little they cared about the Chinese human life is just atrocious. But then it's funny to me because I remember I was in a college class, and the turn of this is that the Americans were bad to the Japanese because we nuked them, and nuclear warfare is bad, and all of the problems that we've had since are all because that because here's the thing, that completely dismisses the idea that the Nazis were also looking at nuclear weapons. We actually bombed their biggest facility, but there's belief that if we had not destroyed their plant, that they might have actually gotten nukes before we did. That's alternate history, and we can get into that. But the point is the idea that no one would have invented nukes if we hadn't of is totally false.
Again, that's rather arrogant.
Right.
That's so arrogant to be only the Americans would have been so smart.
Or so dastardly.
Yeah.
Or so evil to have come up with this. But they bring up the burning of Tokyo.
Right.
And they bring up McNamara's quote saying that whoever loses this war, to include us, this is before World War II ends, will face human rights violations. Because, and here's the thing, is I understand what he's saying, because yes, the bombing of Tokyo, we literally bombed a civilian population so that they couldn't send people into factories, essentially.
Sure.
We kill all their population, they can't
produce.
They can't produce the thing. Sure. So yes, that's bad. But here's the thing: when you're talking about a war, you have an enemy that is already massacring people. That we know if they win, they will massacre all of us, but not just all of us, all of the world. Same was true of the Nazis. This is not an enemy that is playing fair or is going to play nice with you or with anybody else. This is an entity that is only going to destroy. So fighting them with that mentality of we cannot lose under any circumstances. This is brutal but effective. Sure.
Those two things are often, they go together quite frequently.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel does that justify the burning of Tokyo? I think it does.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about looking back at history, which looking back at history now is kind of a weird thing to do because there's this prevailing idea that we need to make the past fit our current narrative, and so
Right.
we often change the past. But what's difficult about looking at the past is that you're really not supposed to change it. Like, you're supposed to look at it for what it is and
Right.
just accept that what happened and not try to change the narrative.
Right.
Right? And so, yeah, like, we absolutely bummed the fuck out of
Japan.
like we did. Were there reasons? Yes.
Right. I mean, but even if you look at the number of people that we killed in bombing Japan with 2 nukes and the bombing of Tokyo, we killed less collateral damage than they did in the Philippines, in China, in Korea, which was North and South at the time.
Right.
I mean, one of the reasons why North Korea came to prominence afterwards is because they said we cannot ever be weak again.
Right.
To allow someone like Japan. So you look at like just even all of these years later, we're still dealing with the ramifications of, what Japan did. And it's funny, like everybody, like it's so funny because I've actually had people ask me this and it just makes me like roll my eyes like super hard. Because whenever you hear about North Korea doing tests, it's always against Japan. And people are like, well, why
are they picking on Japan? I'm like, did you not pay attention?
Right.
Clearly, you did not pay attention in history class.
Right.
Like,
well,
there's
it's not taught at all.
There's a reason why they hate Japan. There's
Right.
a reason why other Asian countries don't like Japan because they're mean. Like,
yeah. At least they used to be.
A super incredibly effective PR campaign to then market themselves as tourist hotspot, things that you can only get in Japan.
But they're still probably the most racist country on earth because it's like they're fine for tourists. Because
Yeah,
like,
but
we'll
don't
take
live
your
there.
money, don't live here.
Yeah.
But like, we'll take your money if you want to come and visit, that's great, and we'll be very helpful and very nice. But the moment we hear you're trying to buy property or rent something,
Not allowed.
You are scum. You are not Japanese. You are not worthy.
Yeah, well, it's a huge thing. Like, there's a TikTok, like, little TikTok tag of transplants who have lived in Japan, but more specifically, ambassadors' kids. So, like, ambassadors will move and then they'll find a wife or a spouse that's, a Japanese person. So they have a mixed race kid. The kid is technically Japanese.
They don't care.
They don't care.
The most racist country.
And so now there's this like TikTok thing of like what it's like to be a biracial kid growing up, and they're like, I'm constantly having to convince people that I'm Japanese, or they will speak Japanese, like let's say at a restaurant with their other Japanese friends, and waitresses or waiters will just look at them like, I don't know what language you're speaking, and look at their friend like, you tell me what language you're speaking. And they're like, I'm American. Like, I don't speak Japanese. Like, I'm here because this is my cousin. Whatever, like.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that I really do think that Asians are some of the most racist people on earth because, like, the joke is can you tell the difference between Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese? But they can. And, like, I've spent enough time in Asia to where I generally can. Mostly, like, you can tell in the bone structure of some of these things. And there's a hierarchy. And, like, everyone thinks that theirs is the best. Or at least the most victimized. And they hate all the others because you've got thousands and thousands of years of, well, you beat us at this battle, but then, we were king at this time or whatever. When you live in that proximity, you have, grudges.
Sure. I mean, that to me was kind of weird, the Stop Asian Hate movement that happened around COVID times. It was weird to me because I've lived in a pretty decent amount of places, but more specifically, I've lived in a lot of places where there was a pretty high density of Asian population, and I had like 90% of my friends in school and growing up were Asian, and I never remember anybody ever saying like, oh, we experience Asian hate. Like that to me was when the Stop Asian Hate movement came up, I was like, I was really confused.
Well, I feel like there's 2 or 3 factors that the mainstream news don't talk about.
Sure.
So the first one is do you know where I want to say 70 or 80% of the Asian hate comes from? Black community. So that's why that statement never gets fully finished, because most of the Asian hate comes from the black community, and since for, political reasons you can't ever blame them for anything or hold them accountable for anything, you have that. The other issue of that is and I'm not trying to be like that guy, but generally speaking, the black neighborhoods, specifically the poor black neighborhoods, the ghettos, the whatever, tend to be the lapdogs of the Liberal Party, the Democratic Party. So what I think is you have a push to hurt them, knowing that you can never blame the black community. But the reason is because, we were just talking about, small businesses, home ownership. Guess what? The highest percentage of Americans that have small businesses and whatever it's Asians. And a lot of them are in black communities. Like the reason why...
Okay, so that makes sense. Because I really was so confused. I was like, who is hating on the Asians? Like, if anything, every time I turn around, it's, let's promote Asian culture. Like, we're going to promote Asian culture, movies, anime, Korean dramas. Like, anytime I turn around, it's like, we are romanticizing an Asian culture, which is fine. Like, I've got no beef against it. Like, I can't do Korean drama, but I can get behind a good anime.
I mean, if I'm just going to be honest with you, in terms of culturally speaking, like in terms of art, I like the extreme Japanese horror genre.
You would.
That to me is the...
if they're going to do a thing, they do it superbly.
Yeah, there's enough of that has been made that's of a high level. I'm a horror fan. I don't tend to like the Korean horrors because it's more ghosty, and like there's always a twist that isn't really twisty, and like they've gone full communist in a lot of their modern things that they've done. Like I hated Parasite, which I know is like the big, like if you've seen this, it's the greatest thing ever, and it's pure Marxism. And to be honest with you, I really like The Raid, but I'm trying to remember, I believe that is Singapore, that comes from Singapore, or I'm not 100% sure where that comes from. Maybe Malaysia. But anywho, there's a few things, like obviously like the Hong Kong action movies back when it was still British ruled. The problem is now Hong Kong...
their agreement lapsed, and now
they're owned by China.
They are owned by China. They don't like it.
They don't like it, but they have no ability. They have no freedom of speech anymore.
Yep.
So it's like, whenever you have a top-down government-controlled thing, the art's going to suffer. So like, I grew up in the '90s, which is like the old John Woo, Hard Boiled, all that. Jackie Chan came out of there. All that. That doesn't exist anymore.
No.
It just doesn't exist
That
anymore.
got shut down right quick and in a hurry.
Right, because the idea of action and standing up for yourself, can't have that. So, but anyways, I feel like we've segued enough into the 1950s movement. Here's my thought, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people, and, we obviously agreed because, we're married now, but... A lot of women really wanted to be independent. They wanted to work. They wanted a career. They wanted to be, just as good as a man, quote unquote. But here's the thing. I, as a man, don't want you to be a man. I don't want you to take on male characteristics.
Sure.
Like, here's the reality. And here's the thing that never made sense to me. There's a few things I want to get into talking about the 50s lifestyle, but the number one thing is children. So if I work full-time and you work full-time and we're both out of the house, we can't have children.
Who's taking care of the kids?
Right, who's taking care of the kids? And the answer is always, we have babysitters.
Right.
So I never understood the idea of why you would ever have children to have random strangers raise them.
Right.
And what's become more and more apparent is when you... give this to a third party, why are you, why are like we're finding that the school system is pushing all this transgender crap. Like you don't know what's being.
Well, the school is basically raising your kid.
Right.
Yeah.
The school, third parties, and I'm not trying to pick on you, but like there's a lot of the idea of the Mexican nanny that works for less is a trope for a reason in a lot of countries because they'll work for cheap. And
well, I mean, I told you about my childhood. Like that was a thing. Like
right.
I lived at home, obviously, with my with my mom. For whatever reason, there was like a period of time where my mom and my aunt lived together. So we have two women who are both working full time, but they also both had a full set of kids. So my aunt had 3, my mom had 2. So now there's 5 kids at home. Both moms are working. So who took care of us? A Mexican nanny. I mean, I'm brown, so that makes sense. And we also lived on a border town, so again, that makes sense. But the reason why they could afford it is because she worked for pennies.
Right. And I think that's generally true of the trope of Mexican nannies. And I think that what ends up happening is, it's not a white thing, but I think it's a European, American, like the idea of exceptionalism and pushing hard and doing well and being, hyper masculine and having that directed. That's completely gone away. Because let's be real, like the reason why Latin countries tend to be so overpowered and have these dominant things is because it's a very weak people mindset. Like they don't stand up for themselves. And when you get somebody who's directly from that country, because the people working for pennies are not Mexican Americans who've adopted Americanism. They are people who have grown up in these other places. They've gotten here. They need the idea of you're going to give me a place to stay and pocket money that I can send back to my family.
And I don't have to report to the government.
That is the people who's raising these children. So these children are getting raised with this very weak, subservient mindset, and it helps create the government dependence, I never have to do things for myself, the failure to launch idea has just become the norm. And I think a lot of that has to do with you're not getting taught things. Parents don't know what the fuck to do. But then on top of that, when you have, when you had the old way of the man worked and the women didn't, there's a couple of different problems that have arisen from that. First things first is you made it work. You just did.
Sure.
Like you were going to be so culturally and financially screwed leaving a woman with children that you just didn't
You made it work.
You made it work. And ultimately, most people were happier long term because their children were taken care of, their community was taken care of, and all the things. So 80% of all divorces are women filed because they're not happy. So here's the thing, I honestly believe women are happier when they're around their kids. Like, I think that most women...
I could buy that for $1.
I think most women would be happier being around their kids, being a mom, but they're told that they're not allowed to be. They're told they're not supposed to be. So what you end up with is you're in a marriage, you're both working, you never get to see your kids, you're unhappy. You're unhappy that maybe you're taking... there's an expectation for you to take family roles, familial roles, household roles that the man isn't taking. And you look at the man and you're like, well, what are you good for? So my children aren't being taken care of. I'm not really needing you anyway. I don't need the money. If I divorce you, I'm going to get your money anyway.
Sure.
So then you have the breakup. And then you have children that are not around a father figure. Right. You don't have stability in the home. And what ends up happening, and what has ended up happening, is I always bring this statistic out. In 1960, back before the huge women's movement, the average, and this was from a few years ago, so it's probably higher now with inflation.
Sure.
But the average minimum wage was $21 an hour if you did inflation from 1960. Huh. So now I'm sure it's like $25,
oh, sure.
or maybe even $30 an hour with where we're at now.
Yeah, inflation the last year is stupid.
Right. I mean, I haven't looked up the statistic in a while, so I'm sure it's skyrocketed. But it had been 20, so it's only higher now, and this is from a few years ago. So you didn't need 2 households. So what you've actually done by inflating the work market is you've deflated the wages. So it's become now where you almost need 2 homes, income, in order to actually be middle class anymore.
Oh, yes. I feel like that should be a known issue. Like, I feel like people should know that. Whether or not they do, I don't know. But yeah, like, the idea that I think it's just one of those, like, if people want to get back to the old way, like, how do we make it impossible? We raise the cost of living so much that even if it makes sense to have a stay-at-home mom, you can't, because you can't make it work.
Well, I mean, if you go back to the whole idea of stability, like, you own your own business, you own your own home.
You live over your business.
Right.
Right. Like, then you don't even have to pay for rent to, you know, like, the idea of, like, I have my shop and we live over my shop. There's a reason why it worked.
Right. So nowadays, you don't even have stability over your own children because you're now splitting them with another person and the government. You never get to see them. So, like, before, you had the idea of, you had financial stability, you had stability of location and ownership, and then you also had stability over, like, you know, if I choose a partner whom I trust and who has the same morals and ideals that I do, my children are probably going to be raised in such a way. So, like, even if they went to school on a general thing, they get home and they try some crap, mom's going to get on that quick in a hurry, because she's been, you know, doing housework all day, and they're getting home, and like she's excited to see her kids because that's her focus, and she's not worried about, you know, getting work done for an employer or whatever. You know, at the end of the day, and then she's like, "Oh, what'd you learn today?" And they're like, "I learned some bullshit about, like, I need to cut my dick off." And you're like, "What?
Guess what? Your dad and I are going to talk about today."
Right. Like that. Like, you would have had parents storming the whatever, but like, when, you know, largely speaking, you need government assistance and subsidies to pay for children, to pay for the childcare and those sorts of services. So these are, again, a chance for the government to come in and impose their will.
Yeah.
And what you have is that, like, you know, if they're on, you know, online, like, COVID, I think, really actually opened up a lot of people's eyes, because people were watching these classes and just, you know. What
the ever-loving, like, fuck are you learning?
Right.
Or why is it taking so long?
Right.
Like, you told me that all day today you learned about 2 + 2. That's the only thing you guys talked about for 8 hours.
Right.
Yeah, like, why are you wasting my time?
Right.
Yeah. Which makes sense when your kid comes home and you're like, "What'd you learn today?" And they're like, "No." Well, yeah, because you didn't learn anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think you have that as an issue. I mean, there's just so many things that I think, like, that's really where it comes down to. You have financial instability. You have, you know, insecurities in the home. I think it creates unhappiness. Because here's the thing, like, the marketing towards women to be men, when I don't think that they're, you know, internally wired to have the same drives as men.
Sure.
But then you fuck with the economy to where it's needed.
Right.
Everyone's unhappy, no one knows what to do, and they give up all of their position of strength, when the traditional way of, like, I have control over my children, I have control over my lifestyle, I have control over where I live.
It's the illusion of choice.
Right.
You do have the choice, but not really. Like, we're going to make things so that you have to choose these options.
Right. Like, this has been structurally engineered from the top down, and people are miserable under these circumstances. And then you hear about what's going on with, like, you know, putting crickets and worms in food and things of that nature. And you know that's coming. It's absolutely 100% coming. And here's the thing. It's not necessary. It's literally...
we're paying farmers not to farm.
Right. The reason why this is happening is to subjugate people to such a degree it breaks their will. Because if you have them live in something that they don't own, and they're grateful, and the only thing that you're giving them to eat is crickets, like, I feel like you eat a bug and there's just something in your soul that's like, that's fucking nasty. Like, you know, like survival training and all military stuff aside, like there's a reason why it's like mental toughness that you have to do this to survive, because it sucks. the idea that that's going to become the norm because of global warming when you have Obama buying, a huge fucking
the place
beachfront property.
The place that's not going to exist in a year, but he just paid how many millions for it?
Right. But he's been living there for a decade. But
sure.
But any day now.
Any day now.
But so you need to eat a cricket.
Yeah, no. Well, so here's some interesting things, right? So you mentioned how women are happiest around their children,
mm-hmm.
right? So here's a statistic for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what the most and least popular church services are outside of Christmas and Easter?
Mother's Day?
So Mother's Day is actually the most packed church service outside of Easter and Christmas. Do you know what is the least?
Father's Day.
Father's Day. Because generally speaking, when moms have Mother's Day or whatever, and people are, what do you want for Mother's Day, Mom? Mom says, I want all my family with me doing the things that I want to be doing, including going to church.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas dads are like, I want to chill, I want to relax, just let me take a nap.
Right.
And they don't say, come to church with me.
Right.
So you said...
I want bourbon and John Wayne marathon.
Yeah, I wanted bourbon and John Wayne. Give me a cigar.
Give me a cigar and a steak.
And rub my feet and let me take a nap.
Yeah.
So you said moms are happiest around their kids. This is a known thing. In the church community, or especially pastors who take account of things like this, this is a known thing. They're like, we need to have a good message on Mother's Day. We can have a crap message on Father's Day. Nobody's coming.
Yeah.
And so that's a thing.
Yeah.
But the other thing you said was how divorce rates are 80%, filed by women,
and most is because they're unhappy.
They're unhappy. So, but then you also mentioned how you have the nanny come in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that it came up in a very brief conversation, pretty, when we were talking about just family structures, and I was like, absolutely not. We're not having a nanny in a home,
right?
Because it's just a thing. Men will equate feelings towards the nanny, which is why when men get divorced and they have young children with a nanny in the home, who are they marrying? They marry the nanny. There's a reason why that's a trope, that my husband married the nanny or my husband married the maid, because that's the way it's supposed to work, is that the man went to work and the woman stayed home and took care of his things, his
which I feel
family,
like a lot of,
his kids.
Because the Latin community, which if we're talking about Latin nannies, is so familial based that I feel like a lot of those nannies, they're that's right up their alley.
Yeah, they're taking care of the
taking
kids.
care of children. They're being taken care of, and the man works. There's no problem.
Yeah, there's no problem. And then the wife is working, and the wife comes home and sees the husband eyeballing the nanny, and is like, "Why are you eyeballing the nanny?" Well, because she's doing your job.
Right.
What did you expect? I'm not trying to be any kind of way, but
yeah,
she is literally fulfilling your role. So the
right.
fact that she took your spot in your bed doesn't surprise me.
Well, I feel like it all comes down to this idea of roles and this idea that men and women, for equality to be, they need to be the same. You're making women into bad men. And here's the thing, is I think that men need women and women need men.
Sure.
And this idea that you need to change men is bullshit. Men are designed the way they're built to serve a purpose, and this idea that you're getting rid of toxicity. Men are the one fighting for their children, and you want scary men to be in front of the children, because we have a lot of evils out there right now.
Sure.
But the idea of this equality, when I'm not trying to be a certain way of saying separate but equal, but I feel like women absolutely have a role. But we've gotten rid of that role for them. We've gotten rid of all of those instincts. We've told them that home ec isn't important.
Well, we've also made it so easy.
Mm-hmm.
So it used to be that kids started school at 6.
Right.
Right? And that was first grade, right?
Or
and
kindergarten,
then, well, kindergarten is 5.
Now it is, but I went to school at 6. Yeah.
So kindergarten gets moved down to 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the T4 program. Now there's the pre-kindergarten. Right? So now kids are going in at 4. But now you can send kids to school with your Head Start program at 3. So what we're doing is taking more and more off the woman and saying, you know what, this isn't your job, you're not qualified. in order for your kid to get a head start, because why would you use a word like head start? That's a positive word. I'm getting a head start. I'm getting ahead in the game. I'm getting a positive that somebody else isn't getting. So I get a head start, and I get to push my kid into school at 3. And then they get into pre-kindergarten at 4 and kindergarten at 5, and they're going to be so ahead of the game at kindergarten. You know what statistics show?
They're dumber.
No, it all levels out. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Whoever reads first, whoever has letter recognition and number recognition first, by the first grade, none of it matters. Because they're all learning at the same rate after that. It's not about who gets the basics first. Once you have the basics, you're still learning at the same rate after that. So I was taking care of my grandfather a couple of summers ago, and he has it play on the news just all day long, every day, all day, and it just loops. And the story that they kept pushing was this mom who was so happy that she lived in an area that cared for her, because she's a single mom, and that this area, she's never going to leave this community. She's never going to, aspire to leave, because this community made it so easy for her to send her kid to school at 3. And you know what? She doesn't even have to worry about breakfast. All she has to do is get her kid up and get them dressed and drop them off at 3 years old, because the school will take care of breakfast, the school will take care of lunch, and the school will even take care of an evening snack, because she needs to run errands after work. So dinner is going to be a little bit later. So now she has time to pick up dinner after school. And this story played more than national news events. So all day long, for like a week, they just kept pushing the story. And then my grandfather is talking about, like, oh, I'm so glad they're taking care of this woman. Like, I'm so glad that, women in the community are taken care of. I'm so glad. And all I kept thinking was, yes, I'm glad that there are services to take care of people who need to be taken care of.
Yes.
But this, to this degree, is brainwashing.
Absolutely.
Because now what you're doing is you're romanticizing it. Because now what you're doing is you're telling a woman, if you go to work and you do the things that you need to do because you're a single woman, you can send your kid to us earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier.
Yeah.
So now we're sending kids to school at 3.
Well, and here's the thing. I really think that not having that time with the child, the mother never fully bonds. Like,
sure.
It doesn't get to, she never becomes a good mother.
Right, because you never get to know them.
Right.
Yeah.
If they're gone all the time, you're not actually becoming a mother. You're not actually developing. And if you're worried about paying for things and having a job outside of that, you can just focus on yourself, and then, you think, I spent an hour a day with my child or 2 hours a day in the evening. I'm a mom. Nobody knows how hard it is to be me. And it's like, then they want all this money from the dad. And the dad...
It's also the experience, right? So kids, if you didn't know, so I'll get back to your money from the dad.
Sure.
Hold on. So the other thing is, there's a compliance fatigue, right? So basically, you send your kid to school all day long, and they know they can't misbehave at school, right? Because they're little. These are 3, 4, 5. Sure. They have an innate sense of, like, I'm not with my parent. I'm somewhere else, and I need to behave because I'm in this institution. So then they get home, and what do? This is a biggest joke with all moms. Any mom who's listening to this, I know exactly what my kid does as soon as I pick them up from daycare. They lose their shit. They lose their shit. And so as a mom, you're going to pick up your kid and you're already like, I'm going to pick up my kid. They're going to lose their shit. I don't know why. It's called, like, the mom thing. Like, every mom knows it. Every daycare knows it. And so then you don't even want to pick up your kid, because you know that they're going to lose their shit, they're going to misbehave, they're going to cry, and it's a compliance fatigue. They're so fatigued from being kept up all day long, from doing mental things that they're supposed to be playing. There's a reason why.
At 3, you just kind of send your kid outside and let them play.
And you send your kid outside, let them play, let them learn things through natural consequences, and eat dirt, because they will learn that dirt is gross. You don't do that. Bugs are gross. Shouldn't eat those. don't climb too high on the tree because if you fall, it hurts. But instead, we're putting them in a confined environment where they're not allowed to do a lot of things.
There's no consequences to anything.
There's the consequences are timeout or solitude.
Right.
Or you don't get to do what you want to do.
Right.
Those are not real consequences. All it teaches somebody is, well, I can now be mad in my solitude.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not getting what I wanted, so I'll just act out when I get to my mom because whatever. So now you're not even incentivizing the mom to pick up the kid. So if the mom says, I'm paying X amount of dollars, exorbitant amounts of dollars, and the most return on my investment is that I can send my kid for 12 hours, you bet your bottom ass, like, I will send my kid to daycare for 12 hours because I am paying crazy amounts, and when I pick them up, it's awful.
Right.
So, yeah. And then, because they're paying crazy amounts, guess who's now footing the bill?
Yeah, the dad. And here's the thing. Because you're paying this money that the government comes for you, I know people who are parents, and between alimony and child support, 75-80% of their entire income, like, they literally are, like, couch surfing. Yeah. Which, again, like, they're renting.
Yeah.
My
uncle did it for years.
Yeah.
Had no home. And the what kept him going was that he traveled for work. So because he traveled for work so often, he was in a hotel week after week after week because he's traveling for work. And then it was like, where do you go home to? And he's like, Friend's couch. So I go to my cousin's house. I go to my aunt's house. I go to my parents' house. Literally could not afford housing for years.
Right. And I mean, that's crazy to me because it's destabilizing the man. The mother's destabilized. The kids are destabilized. But that's all they know, so they keep perpetuating it. And then they're like, well, you're just trying to keep women folk down now that we're finally getting equal. And it's like, honey, you had it better before.
My grandmother says it all the time. My grandmother says that my generation, she's like, you guys are the generation who got duped and brainwashed. She's like, we had it so much easier before. She's like, all I had to worry about was, is my house clean and is the food cooked?
And
like,
are
my children
safe and well behaved?
Safe and like well behaved. She's like, my life was so easy because all I had to do was take care of the things that were given to me. Right. My house, my food, and my kids. Right. It was given to me. And I took care of it. Right. She's like, and now you guys, she makes fun of us. She's like, you women are just running around like chickens without a head. None of you know anything. You can't do anything. You're exhausted all of the time.
Right.
And she's like, you're stupid. She's
right.
like, your whole generation was just completely duped.
Right.
Yeah. She laughs about it.
Yeah, and like, as a man, like, I want to be able to work, my ass off because I'm not worried about my kids.
Yeah.
Like, if I know that my kids and my home and my food are taken care of, I'm free to work, to get ahead, to do things, to take care of. I'm more compassionate to other people because all my needs are being taken care of.
Sure.
And, if a war comes, like, my family's taken care of.
Right.
And, in the military especially, there's the whole idea of, like, one of us doesn't make it back, you kind of cover over and look after that person's family. I know a lot of people do that to this day. So it's like, that familial unit. But nowadays, like, we've gotten so crazy and so sex obsessed that I feel like sex and the ability to quote unquote whore around
sure
was the catalyst for that equality. And it's so funny because it's like, sure, sex is fun, but at the same time, like, it's candy. It's candy. Yeah. There's no substance to that. Like sex ultimately is for having children, but we don't want the consequences of having children, so now we have abortions.
Sure. And birth control and the morning after pill,
right.
Which, like, the
are
whole...
cancerous by, like...
Yeah, like, birth control is so bad for you.
Right.
And then there's now all of this talk about how even if you've never taken birth control, those hormones are still in your body. And when I say your, I mean women.
Right.
So I'm speaking
and
to women.
And men.
Sure, and men. But, so women now are talking about how they have never taken birth control before, but they're still having fertility issues. And they're saying now that the conspiracy theory reason for it is that let's say that I take birth control, right? And now those hormones or active ingredients is in my urine, right? It's getting flushed down the toilet.
Right.
But the water system and water sanitation method
doesn't purge it.
Was never designed to purge hormones.
Right.
It was never designed to purge medical waste. So you're now taking regular birth control, you're now taking the morning after pill, you're now doing abortions and those medical waste plus the hormones in just regular urine is in the water, and now we're just drinking it.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's affecting men too.
It's insane.
Erection rates, testosterone rates in men is plummeting because typically when you talk about birth control, what you're talking about is estrogen.
Right.
So you're getting way more estrogen in women, which is fucking them up. It causes cancer in men, which is the other thing when you talk about like the trans community and like putting children on hormone blockers and giving them estrogen. You're like quadrupling the cancer rates in these people, and it's like, oh well we pretend to care, and that's its own episode. I feel like I'm not going to get too much into it, but like the hormonal implications of introducing hormones into the general populace is awful. Not to mention like what it does to individuals who take birth control and then they can never get pregnant. Yeah,
it's crazy. Like I remember, well, even the idea that birth control is the only way to fix a problem. So, I mean, to get particularly personal, right? If you're irregular, and then you go to, so I mean, like for women, right? So if a woman's menstrual cycle is irregular, they go to the doctor and they're like, hey, my menstrual cycle is irregular. How do I fix this? And you have two options. The first option is eat better and get more sleep, which I feel like is stupid, because what does eat better and get more sleep even mean on a empirical basis?
Right. Like, cause here's the thing is like sleep generally is not a universal thing.
Right.
Like, you know, like, I mean, and I also feel like doctors are just getting more and more like dumb.
Yeah.
Because like to give you an example, and I know this isn't exactly the same, but like the average body temperature is 98.6.
Right.
Mine is 96.8. Like that's just me
just
normal.
Us.
So like if I'm at 99, I'm fucked up.
Right.
But like people be like, well, it's only 0.4 of a degree. It's not that big of a deal. And I'm like, but I'm not 98.6. But they're like, everyone's 98.6. So like doctors are not learning this idea that like there are individualized body sets and types that have a certain thing. So when you talk about sleep, what the ideal number is like they've done studies to find what the recommended normal is, but like I don't think that's true generally of people. Like I don't think that there is oh, you need 6 hours, you need 8, you need 10. Well, you're sleeping 10, that's wrong because the national average is 8.
But even the 8 is skewed because pre-electricity, people were sleeping 10 hours solid.
Because you were on the circadian rhythms of the sun.
So like pre-electricity, you're on 10 hours of sleep, right? And people were fine. Like there's nothing wrong with, and I would even beg to say like if you ever sleep in on a weekend, right? You feel better. Right? Like there's a reason why like 8 is the minimum. Right. You know what I mean? Like I feel like people forget that it's not we recommend 8 hours of sleep, it's we recommend 8 hours
at
minimum.
Least, yeah. And
the minimum means that the better option is to have a little more.
And everyone, well, and the thing is now everyone's teaching you, get up early, do 4 hours, do 6, do less, more. And it's like, then people are miserable because their health is declining.
Yeah. They're like, well, I can be so productive on 6 hours of sleep, but you feel like shit.
Yeah.
You need a 3 p.m. nap. Right. You need 4 cups of coffee.
Right.
You are taking all of these whatever supplements to you have brain fog, so now you're taking, brain whatever. And then you
nootropics,
smoke, nootropics, and then you smoke a joint right before you go to bed because you can't freaking relax.
Right, because all the caffeine crap's still in your system. Yeah, I mean, it's so bad for you. Like, everything's so artificial, and it's like we're getting more and more and more and more into that. I don't know, like, you have that as an issue, and then, I don't know, like, then you're talking about eating well, and it's like, I know one of the things you told me that they told you was like to monitor one of your levels, like iron levels. I think
yeah, the iodine. They were like, well, be aware of your iodine level, and I'm like,
what the fuck does that mean?
What does that even mean?
Because
knowing,
let's say you know what your iodine level, and like let's say it's 10. I'm just using a number. I don't know what it is. Like that doesn't tell me because my knowledge of I know it's 10 doesn't tell me like what it should be.
Right, my inherent knowledge of a thing does not make a difference. Like just because I know I drank one bottle of water doesn't make the water mean more or less.
Right.
Like, so just telling me be aware of your iodine level. Okay, I'm aware now. What did that do for me?
Right. I mean, I feel like if you know that it's supposed to be at 12 and you're like, oh, I'm at 10, I should have more.
Right.
Or it should be at 8 and I'm at 10, I should have less.
Sure.
You know, like I feel like that's maybe helpful, like trying to give a goal and then monitoring it to get at that level.
Exactly.
But like just saying like be aware of it. But that's where we're at now. It's like doctors don't know even what to say, and it literally speaking, like we've trained doctors more and more. It used to be to prevent disease and to make people healthy.
Right.
And now it's to cure the horrible abnormalities that are created by the medical community and medical advice that they give it so bad. And like, you know, the one thing that, you know, I always shit on China, but like there you pay the doctor when you're healthy and not when you're sick.
Yes. Like, okay, so I saw that on a TED Talk and like that to me was mind blowing. So two things. One, I love my grandmother because my grandmother again has.
I love your grandmother.
So she says she's like I used to go to the doctor, and she said I used to go to the doctor, and the doctor had a black bag, and I knew that when he reached his hand in the bag, everything was going to be great because he was going to fix whatever it was wrong. I knew that when he closed the bag, without reaching in the bag, I was fucked. Because
nothing could help.
Nothing could help. And she's like, and now we are, and she does it so dramatically.
Right.
As, you know, passionately as your favorite word.
Yes, all the Latin passion.
She does it so passionately. She's like, and now I go to the doctor and it's go see the foot specialist, go see the lung specialist, go see the eye specialist, go see the elbow specialist. And she's like, and you know what's special about all of them? Nothing. They know nothing.
About anything. And they know nothing about your other shit that you have wrong and like how it holistically.
Yeah, she's like I liked it so much better when the doctor would come to my house with his black bag and he would fix whatever it was with whatever he had in his black bag, and now I go to 7 different doctors and none of them know shit.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah, so it's just ridiculous.
Well, I was going to end us on this last one, which is the Russian drone BS of the Ukrainian situation, and I feel like this is the thing, like, I feel like it gets commented on, but it gets so technical that, like, it goes over people's heads and they don't care, and, like, what we care about is, like, the Bud Light bullshit.
Sure.
Or whatever the fuck is going on with the Trump case that is never going to go anywhere.
It's the Caesar bread parade. Yeah. Like, we're just gonna, you know, razzle-dazzle, don't look over here.
Right. But, like, I don't know. I've heard pro-Russian sentiments that I actually am like, that kind of makes sense. Sure. Like, you know, you look at how much corruption and how much U.S. interference was happening in Ukraine beforehand. You look at least the Russian allegations that there was the Russian, genetically Russian people who were living in eastern Ukraine who were being genocided by the Ukrainian people.
Right.
You look at the history of Ukraine being Nazi sympathizers to include to today.
Right.
And you look at what the Russians were saying, is saying like we're not going to allow them to exterminate Russian people.
Right.
Even if they're in another country. We used to have that country. Like, we understand that not anymore, but we're going to protect our own. You also are interfering with pipelines. Like, we blew up their pipeline. And, like I know that there's talk about whether we did or whether we didn't. I think there's a lot of, you know... Conspiracy and thought and belief that the U.S. blew up the Russian pipeline. You know, the idea that we're trying to exert so much control to leverage against Russia, this is then backed into a corner going, what other fucking options do we have?
Well, the thing that I actually like about them is that I like that they said, if you do this, we will do that. And when said thing happened, they did exactly what they said. There was no dancing around the issue. Right. It was very specifically this for that. You got exactly what was promised. There was no other things going on. You broke, whether you want to say they broke the rules or if they did something stupid, that means less to me. The point is, you were warned.
Right. I mean, I feel like you have to respect a superpower, and I don't know if they're a superpower in the sense that we are, or even China is at this point, but they are definitely a world leader.
They're not weak, that's for sure.
Right. I mean, and there's so many misconceptions about Russia, like, from population-wise, they're about the same population as Italy.
Right.
They don't have a huge population. They have the most land of any place on Earth, and a lot of those are mineral rights, but most of them are unlivable tundra out in the east of Russia. But you also have, a lot of people they're pro Christianity, which they publicly are. I don't know sentimentally how much Putin is. I feel like his KGB ties and some of the things that they make the KGB agents do back in the day, I feel like that dude is granite when it comes to his... he's just evil. I think that there's an evilness that comes from having done a lot of the things that they make those people do. So I don't think that it's stemming from a religious thing as much as it's just getting people on their side by claiming it. Sure. Using religion to be whatever.
Well, we've talked about that too. If you're using religion as the weapon, you're doing it wrong.
Absolutely. But at the same time, I think, talking about Russian having a right to sovereignty, and, the biggest thing that makes me pro-Russia is the fact that they are trying to be multinational banking being put in charge of their whatever, and there's more and more pressure for them to adopt it, and less means for them to have independence without adopting these problems that, we're talking this whole episode about how America is fucked and how we have all these problems, and they're like, brother, we don't want that bullshit, and you're forcing it on us, and you're making it be where we have to either play ball or be wiped out and not have access to any economic stability. So guess what? We're going to take back, militarily to push back those pressures and to push back the things that would make us dependent instead of independent. Right. So, in terms of what's in their best interest, I completely understand where they're coming from. Now, the other things I wanted to bring up is the news against Russia is crazy. The propaganda against Russia is crazy. And again, when you have this much propaganda, I kind of be what else are they hiding? Yeah. So, I don't know if you remember this, but in the beginning week of the invasion, there was the one really viral clip of a Russian tank going through Kiev and, running over cars and things. Yeah. And the lady goes up to the car and it's an old man driving and it's just a tank that went over. So here's the thing, and here's the part that nobody knows. That was a Ukrainian tank. It was done by the Ukrainian government to garner sympathy. They killed their own people. Oh. Yeah.
I didn't know
this is a for sure fact. Huh. So, a lot of the, war crimes and things that were being used against the Russians were actually being perpetrated by the Ukrainian on their own people to get sentiment. Which is, a level of evil.
Right. That's one of those things, you just don't do that. Right. You just don't. You don't kill your own people and then convince said people that it was the other guy.
Right, and the world needs to give you money, which is the other problem of that, is because Ukraine has been such a money laundering scheme that you have all of this money coming through there, and then, it's going to the one Caribbean Coinbase thing, I forget the name of it, but there's all of this money laundering where it's getting back to the politicians, so we're agreeing to send them $1 billion, but then $200 million goes back into their pocket through donations. Right. Which is, the money laundering scheme that's going there, especially with the Bidens, Biden is the least trustworthy person. We know the Chinese have dirt on him that they paid him money. There was just news this week that he was involved in bribery during his vice presidency that just came out during an investigation that the FBI released, doing an investigation to somebody else. They gave information on him. So we know that there are sources that are trying to, give this information that he was taking bribes, taking this for that with the Ukrainian government. There's even the Burisma thing where there was somebody looking into a company that his son worked at, and he told them that they would not send foreign aid to the country as vice president if they did not fire the prosecutor who was looking into the company his son worked at, and forced their hand. And he bragged about it to donors in public. Like there's a video of him doing this. I mean, the level of corruption, specifically the Democrat, but also just the big government stuff that we're afraid of, and world banking and all of the big players. The fact that it's conversion to Ukraine, as much as I know that there's U.S. troops and U.S. whatever on the ground that are, covert, I have a really hard time having sympathies with the Ukrainian government. Not so much the Ukrainian people, because I feel like the people on the ground, it's almost never them.
Well, I mean, when you say it's almost never them, it's never them.
Right.
It's never grandma. It's never, the dad who's working at the mine.
Or the guy who's in front of the line.
Yeah, like it's never the guy who is the cashier at the grocery store. Like it's never that guy. And yet they're the guys that get killed.
Right.
Like,
I mean, because when I think of like a war that really didn't have a good and bad side, I think of World War I. Like, this is just politics run amok.
Yeah.
And you had millions and millions of people dying on the front lines, and their lives didn't get any better. They never got anything for it. I mean, you can say that the one thing that I don't want to call them the Allies, because I don't think they were called the Allies back then. I don't remember what our side was called in World War I.
We weren't. The World War I.
We were in World War I.
Not the first part.
Right, we came in
at the very end.
Right, but we were still a part of it.
Sure.
But,
yes, we were a part of it.
You could largely say that we won the war for them, because...
We came in... Yes, but only because we came in fresh at the very end.
With a lot of troops and a lot of...
Like, the only way...
Yeah,
like, the only reason why you could say we won the war is because it was like we were the reserve guy, and we were like, the guy you put in at the last... 2 minutes of a basketball game who's, fresh and, never exercised.
I understand what you're saying, but the point is that we, when you look at that side, the British didn't suffer the severe financial sanctions that Germany did. Hungary was basically broken up completely and given to its enemies. Like, you could be fighting so that your home wasn't devastated to that degree, but largely... you just got fucked.
Yeah.
Like these weren't evil people. This was just like, hey, my government sent me here, and I'm probably going to die.
Yeah.
And that's the end of it. And I feel like that's what the Ukrainian people are going through right now. And, when talking about gender roles, like, all of the women got to, get expedited out of the country, whereas the men...
stay and fight.
They had to stay and fight. Like, I believe if you're below 45 or 50, you were forced to stay. You weren't allowed to leave. And then, like, the Ukrainian country, or not Ukrainian, but the EU countries that were forced to take in refugees, they were getting refugees from, like, the Middle East. And, like these 30-year-old dudes from, wherever the fuck ever, Middle East, and you're like, what, Yemenis people? And you're like, how does this have to do with Ukraine?
Right, yeah.
But, like, that got pushed in. And again, it's that sort of the EU's mindset of, like, bullshittery.
Yeah.
Where, like they have their own banking destabilization of Europe, of the United States, of all of our countries, because we're the people who can stand up and fight, and you're making Russia look evil. And here's the other one that was really nasty to me, is the Ukrainian torturing Russian soldier videos.
See, that's where I'm willfully ignorant. Like,
it's gross to the
nth degree. Like, the thing is that even if somebody had told me, I would have made myself forget it, because I just don't want to know.
I mean, even if you were to adopt the idea that the Russians are evil and the Russian government's evil, again, the Russian soldiers, the guys in the front line, had nothing to do with that.
Sure.
And they're, like, shooting them in the legs, shooting their arms off, tearing their bodies apart, cutting their dicks off. I mean, but, like, this is videos you can find online, and now it's being...
squashed,
and that's horrible. But I mean, again, like, it's hard not to see the Ukrainians as just Nazis. And I'm actually, like, I'm not trying to say I'm pro, because there's a lot of anti-Russian things, like their freedom of the press is bad.
Sure,
they're definitely totalitarian in their own right, and there's bad things, but
I feel like it's a lesser of two evils decision, which you never want to be in a lesser of two evils situation. Like, that's just a bad
And there's also
spot.
things that we don't know. Like, a lot of this is, because here's the thing. Like, what the Russians say is one thing. I don't trust the Russians are telling the truth. I certainly don't trust that the EU is telling the truth.
Sure.
So, and I always think, like, this never happened under Trump. So, like, nor would it have.
Yeah. I mean, like, I have my own thing about Trump. That's probably, like, a whole thing. I would have liked him a lot better if he wasn't such an ass. Like,
I think a lot of people feel that way.
It was just one of those things where I'm like, he's just a tough pill to swallow. But, like, he also got shit done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what did you say earlier? Like, it was brutal but effective?
Right. Well, I mean, like, I feel like the thing with him is, like, you were talking about, like, you said this in another episode, but you were saying that, like, you never mess with the slow kid who's dumb, because if he tells you that if you do this, he's going to kick you. Yeah. Trump was that kid. Yeah. Like, he's like, these, like, much like the way that Putin was, is like, this is my boundary, you don't cross it or I do X. Trump did the same thing. Yeah. Like, this is my boundary. Like we're not going to play games. We're not going to have like he basically told the Russians, we're not going to do an elongated, front in some country. Like, we're going to make very reasonable lines that are adjacent to yours. But if you cross us, we're going to nuke you. Like, there's no fucking middle ground. We're going to go straight to you don't exist. Yeah,
like, and I know I joke about it, and I don't mean it in any kind of way to be insulting to anybody. But, like, you don't mess with the stupid kid who tells you, don't shove me or I'm going to punch you in the face. Because there's a level of stupid you have to be
respectful of.
Because you know that they're not fucking around.
And they don't know how to bluff.
They don't know how to bluff. It's the same reason why I hate playing poker with newbies. And again, this isn't, like, oh, I hate newbies. No, it's that you're a novice. You don't know how to bluff. You don't know how to lie. So I can't play poker with you because it's a game about bluffs and lies. And if you're too stupid or too ignorant to play the game, then you just don't play. Because if they say, step on my toe and I'm going to punch you in the face, even though that doesn't make sense, you know that they're going to do it.
And that's where, like, Russia keeps saying we're getting close to a nuclear reprisal. I think that people don't understand what that means.
Right.
So, like, most people, when they think of a nuclear reprisal, what they think is like, all of the nukes being sent from silos and intercontinental ballistic, whatever, and, we're going to see them up in the air in the space, and then we're going to send ours before they land. Here's what it probably means.
Go ahead.
A small nuke in a plane that's dropped gravity-wise, that we won't know it's a nuke until it blows up.
Sure. So you're thinking like basically like what was done before with Japan. Like, it wasn't from a silo, like, I mean, for people who have studied history, like, you put the bomb in the plane, you open the doors, and the bomb goes down. Like, this is not sophisticated.
In a small distance missile, you could also do it with an artillery shell.
Sure.
So, I mean, you're not going to know that there's thousands of artillery rounds being shot every day. So, the fact that one of them could be a nuke, like, that's not going to be known until it explodes. And then you have a nuclear explosion that's small yield that takes out a military position where, like, all of the military that was Ukrainian is now dead.
Sure.
Or a civilian population is decimated. And then the question is, well, what do you do? So, there is no reprisal agreement with Ukraine right now that we have. Like, the whole reason why there was talks of bringing them into NATO, which Russia said absolutely the fuck not, and even doing this is a breach of war.
Right. And I think that's where people forget. Again, like, going back to, if you do this, like, Russia was very specific. Don't fuck with Ukraine. Don't put them in NATO. I will take that as offense. Like, I'm telling you very clearly, point blank, don't do it. And what did they do? They backdoored getting the Ukraine into NATO. Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
So now we're in a place where Ukraine is not in NATO. So even if they get nuked, we do not have any, like, real treaty reprisal that is required. We've said that there will be consequences if there's nuclear force, done. However, that doesn't mean nuking Russia Because here's the thing. Like, if we nuke Russia in reprisal, like we send, because Ukraine doesn't have nukes as a country. So if NATO or the United States were to, like, let's say hypothetically that you get a gravity bomb, like a general plane bomb, and it hits Kiev, and Kiev goes boom, and we have to live with this because it's happened. We didn't know it was coming until it happened. So, this happens, and we're looking at it, and we're like, what do we do? Well, the answer is, do we nuke Moscow? Well, if we nuke Moscow, we know for a fact that Moscow has the capability to nuke D.C. and New York or Paris or London or like
insert big city here.
Big city here, and we're not willing to lose those. Like, is that really like something we're willing to trade cities on? Because at some point they're just going to fire their whole arsenal, and the world's over. Fuck it.
Yeah.
So chances are what we're going to do is sanctions, which we already have, and it's like we've already sanctioned them to such a degree that there's almost no more new sanctions we can have. The only real sanction that we could potentially offer is on their natural resources, which, guess what, kills the entire European economy.
I was going to say, which are desperately needed.
Right.
And when I say desperately, I mean can't live without it.
Right.
Like, you would tank your whole system.
Right. The entire European system would tank worse from that than from the war going conventional elsewhere. So I don't think that's going to happen. But then you get that we're basically poking the bear, and I say that as a reference here,
That's
that
funny.
They're trying to assassinate Putin, which again, like when you are not playing by the rules, and there's reason to believe that it was a NATO or U.S. drone that did the attack.
Again, you're doing backdoor shit where it's like, oh no, we won't do the NATO thing, but then you backdoor it, and oh no, we would never assassinate anybody, but then there's a drone, like
but it wasn't like here's the thing.
It wasn't ours.
Like, we're sending special forces, but then we're saying you're no longer a part of the U.S. military, you're now part of the Ukrainian military, but like they're U.S. forces with U.S.
Training
and
orders and
right.
Sure.
Right, and then like we're sending them tanks and things that are U.S. made, and we're sending them all of this shit, and it's like, at what point, if you're Russia, do you look at like this is some bullshit? Like you're not meeting the spirit of law, you're meeting maybe the letter of the law.
Right.
But you're doing everything in your ability to like skirt the law, and the whole agreement was we weren't going to do this shit.
Yeah, you're sitting here telling me that the moon is cheese when I know it's not, and you're like, but it looks like cheese, it smells like cheese, it tastes like cheese, and it's the fucking moon. Come on, like stop dicking around. I can see you.
Right.
Like,
I mean, I think that's where this is going. I think that we are, like, because here's the thing. We are now talking openly about sending U.S. and NATO equipment and forces to do a counteroffensive into Russia itself soon. And this is currently on the news. And I'm just like, Russia will never let that happen.
Sure.
Like if it's a question of like, well, we're going to get invaded, so we need to prolong this and nuke those forces, they will. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. I mean, they have the will and the capability, so I wouldn't put it past them.
Right.
Sure. And while all of this is going on, we're over here talking about Dylan Mulvaney.
Right.
And beer.
And Bud Light.
And Bud Light. So, like, what do you think of that? Like, what do you think, like, why make Dylan Mulvaney such a big deal when there's a potential, cataclysmic event on the line?
Here's my take on this is, when I think of the Trump presidency, in general, I think of two events, and two events only. That during his impeachment and during the Kavanaugh hearings, on that day when both of that was going on, we passed, at the time, the two largest spending bills.
Yes.
In U.S. history that was not covered hardly at all.
At all.
So it's, hey, America, look over here, and we're going to ram you in the ass over here.
Yeah, just relax, you'll like it.
And the fact that, like, people are more concerned with where I fall on this bullshit.
Yeah.
We're not the same political entity, and we don't have the same political cares, because what I care about is this.
Right.
And that's where I'm at. Like, I feel like, the Mulvaney trans movement, I definitely have an opinion, but I also feel like if we can agree to keep it away from children.
Sure.
I'm willing to just never talk about that again if we can talk about foreign policy, government, the impositions that are going on financially. Because, like, here's the thing, like, I know a lot of people, you know, on the conservative side, like, I'm a pretty big fan of, I can see his name, but I can't think of his name, Steven Crowder. And he's, you know, like, I'm pretty fairly libertarian.
Right, I was just going to say, we've talked about it before, we're libertarian, right. You know, if you can do it legally, whatever you want, do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't affect me, and leave minors out of it.
Right. Like, and I feel like his whole thing is like, you need to win the culture war because that matters and whatever. And I'm like, I feel like whenever you say you want to win the culture war, you're already talking about oppressing people and forcing their hand, which I feel like is never the right answer for anything. Like, if your idea is better, people will flock to it. You do have to create a level of openness where people are allowed to.
Right.
That's where I feel like the government pushing the trans movement is wrong. It's not that I care so much about the trans thing. It's that I feel like you're pressuring things onto impressionable people from a top-down authoritarianism. Like, I feel like that is evil. But, you know, his idea of like, well, his idea was this. It's the problem with libertarianism is you're talking about free market economy. And he's like, the problem is that when you have these economies that are doing deals with the government, like YouTube, and they're, you know, suppressing speech, and they're also being told by the FBI who to suppress. So you have government entities, you know, basically creating, but it's a private company, so they have a choice.
Right, it's the shadow banning.
Right.
Banning, shadow banning.
Right, well, it's more than the shadow banning, because the shadow banning is where they just don't recommend you. But the issue here is if you have a company, like let's say Google, who needs government regulations and funding and they need certain regulations to be in place to keep their opponents down. So then you do a deal with the government, and then the government says, well, in response to us doing the thing to keep you in charge, we want our political adversaries to be taken down. And that's essentially what happened with the Biden family and the Biden laptop story being suppressed. And we now have evidence that the FBI told YouTube to squash the story, which scares the crap out of me. So I feel like here's the issue. Anytime you have government-business overlap, is wrong. And I don't think you can have the monopolies that we have in this country without regulatory monopolies from the government. You don't get a one-party system or a one-company industry when you have when you have like a bunch of different people trying the same thing.
Sure.
When you have competition, you don't have that. The reason that gets squashed is you create the hurdle of entry to be so high because of all the regulations you have to hurdle over that nobody compete.
Wants to try.
No one can compete. When the government's throwing their money and picking the winner by deciding too big to fail, so we're going to decide the winner and what banks, and then these banks turn around and decide, well, we're going to get bailed out anyway, so we're going to take more and more risks. Which, if I know I'm not getting bailed out, I'm not going to take those risks. I'm not going to, it creates these problems. So I still think that the libertarian mindset is the way, because if you follow the money, things fall in line.
I mean, that's the great solver of all mysteries is follow the money.
Follow the money.
Like, anytime that you have a problem, if money is involved, follow the money.
Right.
Like, that's just, that it is what it is.
Absolutely. So if you can fix the economics and the spending and the bills, like, here's the thing, like, the reason why we're talking about trannies and impeachments and all the things and beer sales is because it's sexier than talking about spending bills.
Oh, by and large.
Or talking about, like, the political whatever and intrigue in a country that most people can't find on a map. Like,
correct.
You know, or like how close is it to Belarus? Like, do you know Belarus as a country? Like, I'm not trying to be shitty here, but like,
Yeah.
you know, like we, you know, we have sympathy for Ukrainians because again, in the early stages of the conflict, they had
Oh, it was all about sympathy for Ukraine. Send them likes and send them this and donations for Ukraine and blah 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 blah. And then you would ask somebody, "Where's Ukraine?" And they're like, But
why are they being invaded? Because Russia's bad.
Because Russia's bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate that it's the kid version of, you ask them like, who's the Pharisee, and they're like, the mean guys with the pointy weird hats, and you're like, that doesn't even make sense. But like, this is how we're educating kids. Like, who are the Russians? The mean people with the funny accent.
The big guns.
And the big guns.
Well, we have big guns, and our accent's weird to other people. Like,
but
you know,
if we water down education enough.
Yeah, it's good and bad, and our guys are always good no matter what we do because they're us, and nobody wants to take accountability.
And you know who else does that? Communism.
We're essentially a communist country.
Like they water down education enough to, it's like, you know, who are you grateful for? The leader. Why? Because he's the leader. Mm-hmm. Like complete social.
Well, it's like when
circular argument.
Kim Jong Un died.
Yeah.
And was it Un or Kim Jong? I can't remember the fucking names, but he died.
Yeah.
And there was like, you know, people were whipping themselves up because it was
devastating.
Because they have to cry the loudest, or else they could be shot and killed.
Yeah. Like it was devastating for two things. One, it was devastating that the amount of emotional outpouring.
Sure.
For like, you would have thought that their their most saintly mother had died, like the person,
their spouse, their child.
I mean, but this is like their spouse, their child conflated with like Mother Teresa and
Jesus
Christ and stuff. And it's like, I feel bad when a president dies because I'm like, oh, that sucks, a person died.
Right.
But I'm not over here like lamenting and just, you know, down for days.
Yeah, I mean, we're so fucked. And it's like here's the, I always get into this, but it's like, I like Trump generally speaking.
Sure.
I mean, I feel like he was the best of my lifetime. That just showed, not tell you how great he was, but how bad everyone else was. But like, the idea that he's going to save us, when his idea was to, you know, spend us out of debt, that his idea was to...
I mean, he's a businessman, so...
Right, but like, you know, the idea that like he was the one that enforced lockdowns, that he was the one that didn't see any of the COVID thing, that he actually created the COVID vaccine that everyone, you know, is now against. I feel like, you know, the idea that he's the great protector that all of us need, he is the personification of not buying Bud Light and buying Miller Lite when you're giving money to the same ass.